Hello, everybody, and I want to start by thanking the NASRC for the work you're doing on behalf of better refrigerant management and advocacy on alternatives, and also for the opportunity to talk about Trakref and operationalizing compliance today. Operationalizing compliance will be the topic, and I'll start by telling you that I've been doing this for 27 years. We started off early in our company's career recycling refrigerants. Let's start over. I skipped my intro section. Want to thank the NASRC team for all the work you're doing on behalf of better refrigerant management and advocacy on alternatives, and also for the opportunity to talk about Trakref. Today we're here to talk about operationalizing compliance and what that means in some of the best practices that we've seen in use in some of our experiences over the last 27 years. That's how long we've been helping clients manage refrigerants. We started as refrigerant recyclers in 1994. And we were there at the onset of the Montreal Protocol EPA Section 608 requirement engagement. And we've been fortunate enough to work in the industry since then in all aspects. And my name is Ted Atwood. I've been one of the chief refrigerant people here. We refer to ourselves as refrigerant geeks. And operationalizing compliance became a real significant buzzword in the industry last year in June, when the Department of Justice defined and provided guidance for their prosecutors on how to evaluate whether or not a corporate compliance program was effective or was just a paper policy statement for a company. And when they started to talk about the word operationalizing compliance, a lot of people started to ask, what does that mean? And how do we engage with that? And so basically you operationalize compliance by integrating it into your business processes. So it becomes part of the work that you do every day and the job duties and the assignments. Now, there are all different types of compliance programs, but we're going to refer to one that's called a defensible compliance program. You know, there are companies have compliance policies, and some of those policies are in place, and some of those are just in writing, and they're there as a standard or a best practice that people hope to use. But in our experience, the defensible program uses technology to streamline the deployment of a set of processes, and those processes have centralized controls, and they even include things like the data that you're collecting and also the processes that you're managing. These type of programs should have push button analysis to determine if you're compliant or not, and they should be able to help you prioritize what's actually going on and what you need to be able to do in order to achieve compliance. Sounds simple enough. We always suggest a crawl, walk, run model. Now, how that works is, first you have to choose a digital solution. Of course, we suggest Trakref. You're going to need this platform in order to start entering data. And in order to think about, or contextually, what you want to think about is your process, your platform should be similar for your operational team as your accounting software is. So not work order management, because that really tends to track the work and activity, labor and materials, but something that actually tracks activity for your team in relation to compliance, something to supplement your work order system. Now, we always tell people perfection is the enemy of progress, so get started with whatever asset list you have. It may not be perfect. Oftentimes it is not. We see over 80% of the asset lists we receive are not going to provide enough detail, but they'll at least get us started. And you can make improvements over time, but a fast start goes a long way towards showing your stewardship commitment. So get started. Now, a lot of people will look to the third column here and start reviewing their policies and processes. We don't suggest that. We've never seen that be effective up front. You're going to want to update your policies and procedures, and you may find that as you get your policies and procedures from whoever you inherited them from, or as you assemble them together, that you want to update them. You probably need to update them, but they already probably have enough detail in them for you to get started. And they're not the most important thing. The most important thing is to start collecting data on your operation immediately. We refer to that as the 3 A's. You want to be able to collect information on assets, the actors, and the activities. These 3 are going to have the most impact on your success. Assets, first thing you want to do. You want to get those into a shape that's very consistent with what you're going to use long term. You're going to define key attributes. In the Trakref system, we've already done that. We've done that over decades. We've learned what key attributes are necessary and which ones are not. And the very next thing you want to be doing parallel to that is engaging with the stakeholders. You're going to want to find the people that you're going to rely on to enter the data and manage and correct records, and you want to get them trained. You want to get these people familiar with the process, even though at first they may make mistakes. And then you want to define the activities. You're going to want to collect uniformed data on specific tasks. As I mentioned a minute ago, work order systems lack the structure in the documentation process of capturing enough information for compliance teams. We need to know things like initial follow-up verification tests, when were leak inspections performed, what tasks were performed on those days. So you want to keep all those 3 things in mind. Focus on the 3 A's and you'll be successful. And keep in mind that the invoice, it's a relic. It's a valuable relic, but it's a relic of an accounting-centered work environment. And it only defines the labor and materials. You want your compliance system to be asset-centric. It can provide information to financing for environmental compliance because they may have a different bucket of resources to pull funds from in order to be able to provide you with additional funding to help slow the leaks, remove the leaks, or replace the equipment. You want to have knowledge on the requirements, not just knowledge on what it takes to repair an item, but knowledge on how that documentation should take place. What needs to be documented when and by who. And lastly, and it's not the least important because this is all about governance, and that has to be applied at every level. You're going to find that in order to reach that operational status, you have to get to the task level. You've got to break the tasks down inside the tasks. You have to be specific. Don't just tell somebody that you had a leak, but you need to record that you had a leak on the compressor liquid line, why it was, what caused the leak, and what you did to fix the leak. Now, in addition to that, you want to keep in mind that there are 5 key operational requirements that your team needs to document, and none of the 5 have the same attributes. Service and leak repairs will be different from leak inspections, installs, shutdowns, and retrofits. You want to make sure that you tailor the service data collection process to the type of work you're doing. It's a key important attribute to any successful compliance plan. This all starts with what we refer to as an asset digital twin. Now, a digital twin is a virtual representation that serves as a real-time counterpart to the physical product that's in the field. The more closely this digital environment looks like your real environment, the more closely your data collection will align with your goals. As I mentioned, work order systems or CMMS systems, they tend to lack the data structure in order to be valuable. This asset twin can't just be a near approach or near looking asset to the one that you've collected. It has to be really tightly tied to it. So for instance, if you have multiple evaporators on one circuit, you want to be able to document that. Not just document that those are sitting out there, because what that does is it confuses the workforce. And the workforce is going to judge their engagement with your compliance tool, your compliance software solution, in accordance with how well it's aligned with your asset, your physical asset world. Now, there are 3 compliance issues that we typically see in a poor digital asset registry. One, and this is the most common one, we're missing the startup dates. Don't let that intimidate you. We can always work around those type of things, but it's something that you want to keep on the front of your mind as you're looking at your own digital asset register. 2, refrigerant types. Recently, we received 60,000 assets from one particular client, a list, and not one of those assets included any refrigerant type or installed capacity, which is number 3. These 2 are very big, and each one of them has a significance in setting your compliance profile. So for instance, the startup date will set the date where you are responsible for that asset. Not before or after that date, but the date on which it starts. That's really important. So if you started this asset in 2017 and it's now 2021, you should have asset service records for that since 2017. 2, the refrigerant type. This will define your compliance requirements. If it's a type 1 or type 2 refrigerant, you'll have different responsibilities than if it's a type 4. And you need to be able to know that. Trakref does that. It helps people know what those requirements are, but you need to know it yourself as well. Now, the installed capacity also triggers additional reporting responsibilities. Also, it can change your record keeping needs when documenting service. These 3 are critical to success. Now, if you don't have them, it's not uncommon. But until you have all 3 of those things in your asset attribute list, you're still going to experience a high level of risk and compliance vulnerability. Because without a solid asset register, which is a building block for good decision making, you're going to have a difficult time enforcing and executing on governance. Now, this takes a team approach. The Harvard Business School survey determined that 21% of respondents from weak execution companies thought that information flowed freely across their organization, whereas 55% of those from strong execution firms did. And what this means is your sustainability records, if you're reporting for sustainability purpose, your refrigerant emissions, and those things are gaining importance now because the SEC is paying close attention to ESG records, means that your CFO may be signing off on a record or a form, or your chief of sustainability may be signing off on it, based on your profile for how you're collecting information. And so if your information collecting process is flawed, well, then your ESG records will be flawed as well. Now, it's very important for finance and administration to have access to this information because they set budgets. But those budgets can be constrained by traditional limits that might be managed differently by finance and administration if they know what's the goal here. If it's to reduce leaks or replace equipment as it leaks, then this group of people can be very instrumental in making a successful operation, operationalizing a compliance. The regulatory compliance team, of course, needs this because these guys are the watchdogs of the risk. You know, they see things from a very different perspective. As a matter of fact, all of these groups do. The facilities and operations people, you guys are the workhorse. You are doing the yeoman's work of making sure this data is collected. You have all the knowledge about the assets, and it's very important that you're a big part of the success of this process. Governance is key, and you have to set very specific expectations. In a typical compliance best practice policy statement, we see as many as 85 policy statements similar to the ones that are here. You know, for instance, a company agrees to enter all service information into Trakref within 24 hours of performing work. If the work isn't entered, then the company will receive increasing number of notifications, for instance. Maybe employees and agents of third-party providers need to acknowledge their responsibility to provide records, or they don't get paid on time. We've seen these kind of policies take shape and have a really positive impact on results in a number of different scenarios. But even coming to terms on very specific wording about terms themselves helps. For instance, whether you're recording the full charge of a system or you're recording what you added to a system during service. Those should all be defined in your best practices document, and that'll lead to successful governance. And if you're wondering how you measure this, well, it's a chronic learning process. The more data you collect, the more overwhelmed you might feel based on the magnitude of all the requirements, but it's manageable and it's successful. It usually takes about 3 to 6 months to be successful. And you may see leak rates go up during that period, not down, because a lot of companies have a very Jello-like structure to their business as usual processes, before they join with Trakref, and what that leads to is really poor record keeping. So as your record keeping improves, you may see leak rates go up. It's not really that your leak rates are going up. It's just that your documentation is improving. And that's the part that can lead to a little bit of an overwhelming feeling. But you want to start with something simple to do, which is counting transactions. This is our favorite KPI. When you take last year's transactions, if you have a building, for instance, with 10 appliances, and you may have 20 service events that year, and then you come into your first year tracking information in Trakref, then you might find that you start to break those 20 tasks down into leak inspections, service or leak repairs, shutdowns, installs. We typically see about 5 to 7% of appliances replaced throughout the year. So that can account for as many as 10% of all service transactions when you include shutdowns as well as installs. But this is a highly valuable KPI to keep your eye on. Now, the refrigerant geeks at Trakref have been using our experience and awareness on these policies to build a better software experience. And in the words of Pat Riley, there are really only two options regarding commitment. You're either in or you're out. There's really no life in between. You need to operationalize your commitment to being a regulatory success, because it's not enough to have a policy and train on it, and you have to actually apply it to the operational tasks and job duties that'll make or break compliance under that policy. And that's the domain of the controls, policies, procedures, monitoring, auditing that Trakref provides to very specific needs in the HVACR space, particularly in refrigeration. Now, just to have a little fun with this, we came up with two scenarios, and we're going to swap out refrigerants for a term, we'll call it Zimboxide. It sounds a little bit more horrific, and there are two scenarios, and it does bring it all into context. Imagine in scenario one, this is the non-Trakref approach. You do a risk assessment and determine your company uses some unknown amount of Zimboxide. And then you spend 12 months refreshing your chemical policy and training everyone. You have the chief safety officer do a tour. You might even hire Captain Planet to give a keynote address at the annual research meeting or service event training meeting. You join a safety industry benchmarking group. You keep up with best practices. You might even gamify it. But you never actually get into the specifics of how people handle Zimboxide. You have a bad asset register, so you figure that since you can't identify equipment with Zimboxide, it's better to not go there at all. Instead, you keep promoting the policy level stuff and assume the operations or facilities teams will figure out how that's going to apply to them handling Zimboxide specifically. And if not, you kind of hope they don't call the EPA hotline. The result is you might win a bunch of industry awards for best practices programs. Your workers are going to probably continue to mishandle Zimboxide because there's no documentation. Eventually, your system leaks too much, the zombie apocalypse happens. Not what you want. Second option, this is the Trakref approach. You do a risk assessment. You identify Zimboxide as a controlled chemical. You review your policies. You determine that they're kind of ugly and old, but they provide enough authority for you to do your job. You table the policy refreshment until after you handle the outbreak. You realize you have a bad operational policy, but it still helps you identify a few team members who've kept records on handling Zimboxide. You go, you meet with them, you identify more team members, and those team members help you identify a list of assets. You choose Trakref as your HVACR compliance platform, and you work with the service providers to deploy standardized procedures that are built into Trakref for handling and disposing of Zimboxide in accordance with all regulations. As a control, you start using Trakref to record all these events. Employees from maintenance and third-party providers come forward to get training when they realize they can't get paid anymore until they enter their records in Trakref. You train the maintenance workers on how to handle Zimboxide and how to enter records into Trakref. You use Trakref to collect the data on Zimboxide. You keep track of where it's used so that if some leaks, you can get an early jump on the problem, so no zombie outbreaks happen. You do an internal audit to do quarterly checks to enter records of Zimboxide usage, and you deploy a program of periodic leak inspections to avoid the potential of Zimboxide leaks. The end-to-end Zimboxide acquisition, usage, and storage and disposal process ensures you know where, when, and how it all leaked, so you can get started reducing Zimboxide leaks. The result is no one gets any awards, but the company stays zombie-free. Essentially, if you replace the word refrigerants for Zimboxide, it gives you an idea of the scale of what's allowable. Until you operationalize compliance, you're going to continue to leak and remain exposed to risk and potential violations. Now, put simply, doing stuff isn't valuable, but doing the right stuff is. And the right stuff is using the tools of your program to target the operational risk that create or prevent failure and risk. You need to break the problem down into the things people do. And all those no fun parts of compliance get easier and more achievable. And for 27 years, as Trakref's evolved in this direction, we've found that the most effective compliance and sustainability programs are centered around assets and the collection of standardized information across all vendors in a very uniform way. And we're happy to have been able to provide 100% success in this compliance arena during those 27 years. And we look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you. My name is Ted Atwood, and I gave this presentation on behalf of all the refrigerant geeks at Trakref. And we look forward to talking to you soon.